Now, if you like your keyboard shortcuts, this option might be nice for you to know. When you do any sort of CAD drawing, draw circle, draw rectangle, draw letters, rectangular shapes. If you bring your cursor over to the function panel, left-hand bar, click once with your left key just to make sure the focus is in this window as opposed to the drawing area. Then press the Alt key down by your space bar. And what you'll find is a bunch of underlined characters will appear. So these are keyboard shortcuts for all those functions. And they're available in most commands, in most functions that come up in this function panel on the left hand side. Press the Alt key and you get to see all these keyboard shortcuts. In recent versions of Mastercam, I think 2021 and 2022, maybe as far back as 2020, Mastercam has changed the way it highlights geometry. Generally, you have this glowing effect now when you just highlight over solid models or wireframe without actually taking any actions. So I'm not in the middle of another function like transform or a toolpath. This is just the way it highlights geometry generally. Now, I'm a bit old school. I like the previous way of highlighting geometry, so what I'm going to do is point out how to put it back to something like the old ways, if that's what you remember and prefer. In this selection area, I'm going to change 3 settings. I'm going to turn off this switch, use the stipple or the dotted effect on 3D features, turn off the glow effect, and turn back on solid highlighting by faces. So if I do that, you'll see now this is a bit more like how Mastercam used to be, highlighting individual faces. Now, as you hopefully know, if you click on a solid model, the whole thing will still highlight. It's just this highlighting feature that I find is just a little bit more user friendly than that globe or glowing function. So yeah, up to you whether you want to use that or not. By the way, if you're using an earlier version than Mastercam 2022, those highlight options, you can't actually find them in this shortcut area. You actually have to go and look somewhere else, namely File menu at the top left hand side, Configuration, and then in the Screen section you will find the same options: Solid by Faces, the Stipple, and the Glow highlighting options. Now, sometimes, well, in my experience anyway, it can be difficult to see what you've highlighted when you're solid chaining, when you're chaining a bit of a solid model for toolpathing generally. So, for example, I'll start a 2D contour toolpath, and I'm here in chaining mode, 3D selection. I've got the loop mode switched on currently. This is in 2022 Mastercam. The earlier versions work slightly differently in terms of chaining an edge, but the feature I'm about to talk about, highlighting, isn't any different. So when I actually click on the profile to select, you can see, unfortunately, my model is yellow, or a shade of yellow, and the highlighting is somewhat yellow as well, yellow and black highlight. And it can sometimes, depending on the amount of CAD geometry you've got on the screen, can be a bit hard to see what you've highlighted. So what I'd like to show you is how to make the visual highlighting easier to see in solid chaining. So I'm going to go to File, Configuration. I'm going to go to Chaining. And here you can actually set up the line start and the line thickness for your chaining options. So if I use a nice thick line start, save the changes, and you'll see this time if I go and do a new contour toolpath, immediately you can see when you get close to a solid edge, the highlighting's thicker, and when I click on that edge, and you can see now that the solid edge is highlighted quite clearly versus the edge of the solid model. One thing you'll notice that when I chain the solid model, the highlighted edge was a mixture of black and yellow. Now, if for some reason you prefer that to be a different set of colors, there's a couple of things you can do. So back at File and configuration. I'm going to this time go into colors on the left hand side. And we've got two choices to play with. If I go chain, you can see the default color is yellow, and I'll just go red for now. Just so I can save and experiment quickly, what I'm going to do is hit the green tick to accept this. Don't save the changes for now, and it just saves it for the current session until I restart Mastercam. And if I go to the toolpath, you see when you highlight an edge, it's still yellow and black, but when you click on the edge, we now have a different color. I'm not sure what controls the secondary color. I don't know why it's white, but you can see the first color is red anyway. So let's cancel this toolpath. Now I'll do that the opposite way around. That was highlighting in the standard color, selecting in red. So if I put the chain color back to yellow, the highlighting in red. Save the changes just temporarily. Do another toolpath, and you can see that now the highlighting is quite clear to see in conjunction with the thicker line style as well. When you select it, it goes yellow. One thing to be aware of here, I'm using a white background and I've played with the chain highlighting options, the chain highlighting colors. You can see the alternate color for that chain selection, like we did on the solid model. It's using a white secondary color. So fortunately on the chain, you can see that I've kind of lost part of the highlighting. As far as I can see, there's no way to change that secondary color. So if you are using some alternative colors here for chain highlighting, you might need to go and experiment with them to see if any of them give you a different secondary color. So you may be aware that with Mastercam, you can actually drag and drop files directly onto the graphics area to open up a file. So I can drag an existing Mastercam file straight into the graphics area. There we go. I'll just drag a different one. Yeah. Directly opens up, and if this file had been changed, if I'd done something to this file before dragging the new file in, just like normal, Mastercam will ask if you want to save the current file before it opens up a new file. However, for this next tip, what I'm going to do is actually delete the toolpaths from this file. So I'm going to go and hit the stick of dynamite in the toolpaths manager. So what I'm going to do here is take the file that I just opened up on the right hand side here. Rather than drag it onto the graphics area, I'm going to drag it into the operations manager, into the toolpath manager. You can just see in the background here. What that will do is launch an import toolpath operations function. So the normal way of doing this would be to make sure you have a machine loaded in the left hand side here, right click, import, go and do a search, make sure you're looking for Mastercam MCAM files as opposed to operations libraries, and you can go and select a file, open it, and it will give you the choices of toolpaths to import. There's some other options as well. This, if you don't know about this function at all, hit the help button and do a little bit of reading on this command. So by dragging and dropping from File Explorer, you kind of skip all that. You're just dragging a file directly into the Operations Manager, and it immediately launches the import dialog, and it pre-selects the file that you dragged in to give you choices of toolpaths to import. So we have another tip actually related to dragging and dropping of files into the main graphics area. Now, normally when you drag and drop a file, it will replace the current file. However, if you drag and drop a file with the control key pressed on your keyboard, so I'm going to hold down control, drag and drop, let go of my mouse key first, then let go of control, you'll see that it's put Mastercam into merge mode. So you're into merge mode now, and you have the option of manipulating the model, flipping it around, mirroring it, scaling it, or trying to align it to different solid features on the way in. Or of course, you could hit the green tick and just use transform commands to manipulate the file after you've imported it. 3D surface models are not as common as they once were. Basically, solid modeling has overtaken surface models in popularity, and quite rightly so for the most part. You can see that this model is full of trimmed and untrimmed surfaces. It's not a solid model, and you can see that when I turn the shading off as well, looking pretty messy. Now, on models like these, basically they lack snapping points. What do I mean? Well, if I try and draw a line, you'll see that the mouse will not detect any endpoints. No snapping options are popping up on the screen. Same for analyze distance, for example. It's not detecting any points. Now, the way around that normally, if you already know, is to create wireframe. So you have in the wireframe menu a section called create curves, all about creating wireframe geometry on surface models. However, sometimes you just want to do a quick bit of endpoint selection or endpoint snapping on a surface without having to draw a wireframe. The ability is there if you know where to look. So I'll try to use analyze distance here. You can see again, it's not snapping on any of the endpoints. However, if I go to the auto cursor drop down menu at the top of the screen at the selection bar and choose endpoint, you can now see, hopefully, that some little squares are appearing and they're detecting the intersections of surfaces or the edges or corners of surfaces. So it looks like I got that one. So I found one endpoint. To find a second endpoint, I need to go and switch back on endpoint, or I could lock it in endpoint mode, but I'm not worried about that right now. I'll just choose endpoint again. Find the second point. You can see that I have now measured across those 2 points. There's a slightly quicker shortcut I can use there. If I use analyze distance again, now it's gone back to standard mode. It will not detect the endpoints, but if you press the letter E on your keyboard, that is a shortcut for the endpoint mode. And press it again before you select the second point. Then that puts it into the endpoint selection mode as a shortcut. Now you may have wondered in the home ribbon bar at the top of the screen what cut, copy and paste will do. I'll forget about copy image for now. So the idea behind copy, well, cut, copy and paste is you can actually copy geometry, wireframe and surfaces and solids from one session of Mastercam to another. So what I'm going to do here is select this wireframe, that solid model, and these surfaces. I'm going to the home menu. I'm going to choose copy, and then I'm going to minimize Mastercam, this session, open up another session of Mastercam that I have in front of me and choose paste. Now there are some options for the geometry that you're pasting in. You can set it to use the current system attributes of the session of Mastercam you're copying into, or you can get it to use the original attributes, not just use the original attributes. So all I'm going to do is hit the tick button. Not a great color, but you can see that it's brought in all the geometry in the same coordinate system as the original geometry. In terms of 2D wireframe editing, you may be aware of the divide function. Let me go to the wireframe menu at the top of the screen. Choose divide. What you may have noticed when you've tried to use divide sometimes is that you click on a line to delete it and you sometimes accidentally draw a little squiggle, a little extra curve. Now the idea behind this function, if I start again, is that when I choose divide, if you hold the mouse button down, you can drag your mouse around and anything it touches will get deleted. Just going nice and slow here, make it hopefully clear. When you let go, the little squiggle disappears and that's the end of the trimming function. If you do it again, anything it touches will just go away. So be a little bit cautious about how long you keep your mouse button pressed down for. What I want to show you here is this is Mastercam 2020. In Mastercam 2021, they've extended this functionality to the trimming commands and fillets and chamfers, and maybe some more that I haven't actually played with recently. So for instance, if I go and choose fillet entities, and it's just like clicking this line and this line to put a radius in this corner. If I just drag my mouse through the lines, you can see it adds the fillet. Same again, start here, drag down here. It's the same as clicking this line and then the neighboring line. So that's an alternative. You might struggle with it a little bit to get used to it, but it's something for you to be aware of if you didn't already know how to use that function. So it's the same for trimming. If I go trim and put it into trim to entities on the left hand side, just like fillets. So if I drag my little curve between these two, you can see it's deleted the opposite ends of the lines. It even works with trim free entities if you're familiar with using that function. Free entities, select these two first and then come back down and select the middle one. You can see that it's got rid of this line, and this one, and this one. It's the same as pressing that one, this one, and this one last in tree entity trim mode. Sometimes there's occasions where you have a partial circle on the screen and you want to turn that back into a full circle. Maybe you need a full circle for some modeling purpose, or you just want to have a full circle on the screen so you can see it clearly when you're circle milling or helical boring. Now we have a command in the wireframe menu at the top of the screen called close arc. So you can select that, then press end selection at the top of the screen and it will give you a full circle. However, if I then go to analyze this circle, you can see that the start point and the end point is going to be at one or the other end of the circle that you closed. It doesn't reset back to a normal position. Like in Mastercam, typically 0 degrees is a 3 o'clock position here. That's normally what you see as a start point. And the clue to this tip is basically the command that I've just used, analyze. If I analyze this incomplete circle, what you may or may not know is that you can actually edit the circle dimensions in here. You can change its center point, you can change its size, and you can change its start angle, 0 degrees, and end angle, in this case 360, as I want a full circle. So that gives you a complete circle that starts and stops in the normal position for circles drawn in Mastercam. And that might make it a bit easier to understand where your helical milling cycle or circle milling cycle starts when you're selecting an arc. Now what's very nice in Mastercam 2022 is that when you have a toolpath dialog open on the screen, you can actually move this to one side and still manipulate the screen in the background. Now, occasionally you might have had this just by chance in earlier versions of Mastercam, or you have a 3D mouse like a Space Navigator or Space Pilot. I think they let you manipulate the model as well. But I don't think what they would let you do is actually use analyze functions. So even though I've got the toolpath dialog on the screen, I can still go right click, analyze entity, and we have our analyze functions. Or I can even, again, this dialog's still open, I can even use the ribbons at the top and use analyze functions up there, such as analyze dynamic. And then once you cancel that, you're back to Mastercam and just carry on setting up your toolpath. Now in older versions of Mastercam, you cannot typically move the model around, and you certainly can't use the menus at the top of the screen. Some dialog boxes in older versions of Mastercam have this icon, and that's called hide dialog. You could shrink this window down and then you can use some analyze functions. And then once you've finished analyzing, you can press escape once, press escape twice, press escape one more time, hopefully, to get back to the toolpath, and then you can carry on. But not all toolpaths in the older Mastercam versions, or even in the latest version, not all Mastercam toolpaths have this button. Not an issue in 2022 because we can move the model around. But in earlier versions, I'll show you another shortcut. So here I am in Mastercam 2020, and I'm using one of my legacy toolpaths, one of the old toolpaths, Surface Rough Pocket, and it has not got the icon at the top to allow you to shrink the window. However, what we can do is press these buttons, and that will let you go back to the screen then rather than actually just clicking on a point to return that value back into the clearance field, what I can do is at this point I can use analyze. So I can use an analyze entity, do some measuring, find out the sizes of things. I can use analyze dynamic as well. And once I've done my measuring, I can press escape a couple of times to get back where I was. So I wasn't really trying to set the clearance value in this example. I was just using that as a method to get rid of the toolpath dialog and then use my analyze commands.